Today we're going to be talking about trauma dumping. Have you ever heard of that term? I know that I was guilty of it when I first got out of that relationship. I know that I started trauma dumping on those around me. I was writing Love You More. So at that time, I was like trying to detail all the events that happened in the story Love You More. And as I was writing down the timeline, going through photos, visiting emails, going through the text messages, I know that I couldn't stop talking about it. I felt this intense compulsion to share what I was going through, and I did it everywhere. I mean, because I was working full time at it. It consumed me. It was, the first thing that was on my mind when I got up, and it was what I spent my entire day on. And then, so it was all that I had to talk about. And I know I trauma dumped because I even had a friendship. Well, it was kind of a friendship, but I had somebody in my life. I recognized that she had some narcissistic traits. I know a lot of us do that when we're in these relationships. We get used to being around people who are pretty self absorbed. And she decided to call me out on it. She called me up and spent at least an hour telling me what a fool I was making of myself for the fact that I couldn't stop talking about what I'd gone through. And it was shortly after that that I first heard of the term trauma dumping, which really, you want to set me on fire. You accuse somebody of trauma dumping. It just makes me see red. I get really angry about it. So I want to get into today, what is trauma dumping? Is it even a fair word to apply to victims? What's happening to victims when we get out of these relationships? Why do we feel this intense drive, almost a compulsion to retell exactly what happened? And what's happening to our social support system? Why do they feel the way that they feel? Is there a way for them to deal with this differently? I want to get into not only what happens on the victim side, but I also want to talk about what happens on the support system side. What happens among your friends and family as they see you go through and try to heal from this really, really toxic situation. And then I finally want to wrap up by talking about why it works that way, what actually happens, why we have this compulsion, what can we do about it so that it doesn't feel such like a driving need. Oh, thank you so much for that gift. I want to get into that part of it too, because I think if we can understand better the actual neurological mechanism of memory, encoding memories, then we'll be more supportive for sure. But we can also better understand what exactly happening on both sides, why those around us are getting exhausted, but also why those of us who are doing it, talking excessively about our trauma, why we feel the pull to do it. So I actually want to start there first. I want to start into talking about memory consolidation and how it works, because I think that if we have the basic understanding, it just makes the rest of it makes so much more sense. By the way, for those of you who are new to my platform and don't know me, I'm Dr. Kerry Kerr-McAvoy. I'm a licensed psychologist with over 20 years of counseling experience, and I see you guys got a little bit of my camera angle in there. Sorry about that. So I have over 20 years of counseling experience. Trauma dumping is it's a new term. It's a new description, but what it's referring to is the unsolicited and inappropriate I don't know if that's a word, divulgement. If you notice me, if you've been on my platform, you know I create words. I just like to create new words, but it's an unsolicited, inappropriate, kind of like explosion, or that's why they use the word dumping, venting. Maybe that's a better word, venting, expressing, describing of your trauma to an unsolicited, unaware person or people. So it can happen in a group, it can happen one on one, but it's the unsolicited, discussion, storytelling. Where basically it's what you're doing. You're retelling your story to somebody who hasn't asked, or maybe if they did ask, they really didn't ask for that kind of detail. They didn't really want you to get into an hours long worth of what happened. They just are looking maybe to check in with you. Maybe they want to know how you're doing. And next thing you know, you've handed them a dissertation on what you just went through this toxic person. So I want to talk about what's actually happening. So it's really important for us to understand at a neurological level, because it makes so much more sense. So normally when you go through a life event, your mind encodes it in the part of the brain it's called the limbic system. If you were to look at the in a scan of the brain, you would see this whole sphere, and in the center of the sphere is this smaller area, right dead kind of center in the center, and that's the limbic system, and it's made up of various parts, and one of the key parts of it is called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is really important for processing memory. So normally, like say for example, if I asked you, what did you do for Christmas? You would start to tell me who you had over and maybe what you guys ate, or if you did anything special. What maybe you think of a few gifts that you might have had. It would be told coherently. It would be told in a sequential kind of chronological order. It would make sense. And you might express some emotions, but not overly so. You wouldn't be triggered by sharing, unless something really bad happened. But let's assume it's a normal Christmas, nothing eventful happened. You would share it in kind of a normal, easy way of what occurred around that holiday. That's because when we have these experiences, our memory is encoded in the hippocampus. And that makes it, like I said, logical, sequential. There's some emotional reflection that you express in the middle of that, but it makes sense, and you're not hyper aroused. Your heart's not racing. You're not feeling triggered or stirred up. You're just kind of more matter of fact. It's like, it's more easygoing. But what happens with a traumatic event, and unfortunately, I mean, it's very, very important to understand that narcissistic abuse is a trauma. Even though our lives often isn't literally at risk, because usually, if you go to the DSM-5, it would say PTSD can occur when your life is at jeopardy, like your life is under a threat. But what we've found, though, is those who have a narcissistic abuse compared to those who report a PTSD-like symptoms, like maybe they survived an airplane crash, they've been in a terrible car accident, maybe they saw war, active duty. When they look at the symptoms of people who have PTSD and those who are coming out of these relationships, the symptoms align. There's a huge overlap between those with PTSD and those who have experienced a narcissistic relationship, concluding that it's a traumatic experience. I mean, like you're like, well, Kerry, why did they do this research? It just feels so obvious. Okay, yeah, it's obvious to you, but scientists always want to be exact. They want just it's a centimeter. It's a centimeter and 2 millimeters long. They want it to be really, really exact. So they do things like look at those types of connections and make sure that they really are what they think they are. And so they're finding that yes, you leave a narcissistic relationship with traumatic symptoms. You are been traumatized because in that relationship you feel in jeopardy. You feel like you're living in an unsafe environment and you never know what's going to happen next. And as a result, that has left you in a hyper alert state. You've been in a flight or fight state. And when that happens, when we're in that type of a chronic or any type of situation in which that happens, maybe you had a near miss on a highway today. You went into that state. You went into a fight or flight state. And in that moment, your memory began to be encoded differently. It was encoded differently. So during that relationship, your memories were being encoded, some of them, not all of them, differently. And where it gets encoded, instead of being stored in the hippocampus, it gets stored in the amygdala. Now, the amygdala, again, if you think of the brain, the structure of the brain, that big kind of, if we look at the side of a head of a person, the amygdala is near the base of the brain. It's way back in the back, and it sits just above the spinal cord. And it sits in this key spot because it regulates the body's autonomic system. It's where things like it's called the brainstem, and that brainstem organizes things like temperature, heart rate, respiration. It's essential to control your basic body. And the reason it also controls your survival mechanism, it makes sense because if you're in a threat, like say somebody suddenly broke into your house, it would need to take over. It would need to change the regulatory system of your body. You would need to have your heart race instead of being slow. You'd need your blood pressure to go up. You would need digestion to stop. So that amygdala sits in the center of the brainstem, or sits in the brainstem. I don't know if it's in the center, but sits in the brainstem because it then impacts and affects how your body functions in order to prepare you to deal with whatever kind of trauma that you're facing. But what happens during these traumatic events is that memory does not get encoded in the right place. It gets encoded in the amygdala, which then has a lot of repercussions. Some of the repercussions include it's not stored in a chronological, sequential way. Have you ever noticed when you recall something that you feel kind of scattered, that it sounds disjointed? The other thing is it's encoded more raw, it has more sensory information, more emotional, more body sensory information. So you're more aware of, how fearful you felt. You're more likely to even feel the fear again. It has all these kind of like embedded this experience bedded into the memory along with it. And on top of it, it's not been really processed, like made sense of. You haven't really, in a way, it's sort of encoded raw. Which have you ever noticed? If you've recalled something that was highly traumatic as a child, something you've never talked about, you sort of left it alone. When you first recall it the first time as an adult, how awful that feels. Like it feels like you're about, I mean, for me, I've had it happen. It feels literally like I'm about to like something bad, like a catastrophic level. And then when I remember the memory after when I get through it, I'm like, well, that wasn't really a big deal. Why did I feel so bad? I don't know why I was so worked up. Well, that's because the memory was stored in the amygdala, not in the hippocampus, and your body was recalling what it felt like at that age. So if you were a 4-year-old, you're recalling it like how you felt at 4. So, or if you were 10, you're recalling how you felt about it at 10. So when these memories get stored, they get stored in this really unprocessed, very, very raw form. So the body honestly really wants to store it properly. It wants to put it in the hippocampus. And so when we tell our stories over and over, that's an important part of the healing mechanism. What we're essentially doing is we are recoding, reprocessing the event from a different perspective. Here's another thing that's really fascinating. So there's the way in which the brain thinks to itself. I mean, you have this internal dialogue that's going on all the time. It's kind of like, talking to itself. But it's only, have you ever noticed that when you say it out loud, you hear it differently? Or if you write it, you hear it, you even see it differently. It's because your brain interacts with your senses, like your touch, like writing is touch and seeing. You're seeing it and writing. So it's kinesthetic and visual at the same time. Or when you're telling something, it's auditory. You're hearing the words come out of your mouth as you're saying it to somebody else. And again, it's experiencing that information like one step away, one distance away from your actual internal experience. So when we retell, or when we write, or when we, like, maybe you draw, maybe you're into art, but when you share your experience in a new medium, in a new way, you're actually hearing it in a different way or experiencing it in a different way, so it allows your brain to encode it. Here's another really great test. Do you remember how you thought in elementary school that the building was so big and the hallways were so long and the teachers were so tall? And have you ever gone back to one of your old schools where you've actually walked through an elementary building where you attended and you see how tiny it is? Because now that you have your full adult height and you're going in from a new perspective, suddenly everything looks really, really different. That's the same way when we revisit these events, especially if we're doing it in a helpful, healing way, safe way. Like I think of it as a psychologist, when I create an environment for someone to share stuff with me, I'm creating what I could call the holding environment or a safe container. So particularly when you're sharing these events in a safe container, then you view it from a different perspective. And then suddenly it takes on you have new ahas or new conclusions or whatever that goes with that. So it's really important to understand all of this, because then it makes more sense why you're feeling this intense need, this intense compulsion. It's the body's effort to heal from a very traumatic experience. Okay, so but let's talk about that's what's happening on the victim side. I want to talk about what happens on the listener's side. I think this is just me now talking as an observer of human nature, humanity. I think we as a culture, and I would say pretty globally, because I hear people complain about this around the world. So it seems like it's a global problem. I don't think we get trained in how to support people. I really don't. Well, first of all, you have to take into consideration, and I've shared this before, that roughly 20% of the world's not very healthy. I mean, really, really not healthy. So 20% of the world's probably pretty manipulative, pretty exploitative. So as a result, that's causes problems because they're not going to listen to you from a standpoint of how can I help you. They're going to be listening to you of I'm competing with you. You're you're one upping me. You're now the biggest victim. I'm not the center of attention here. I don't like you taking the floor. That probably happened in the case that I shared at the beginning, at the top of this discussion about 15 minutes ago. The person who called me up and reamed me out for an hour. Chances are this person, in fact, this is what she said to me. It was a woman, by the way. She said to me, everybody has it bad. You've had it no worse than anybody else. Now, if you guys have read Love You More, in fact, today I was speaking to my Mexican accountant, and she just went through Hurricane Beryl, and everything down there is okay. I know people who are there. I have property there. It's all okay, but they lost power for several days. And she said, in the midst of not having power, you'd given me this book, so I pulled it out and I read it, and her comment was, wow, in caps. You have to know this woman. She's in her 60s. She's from Netherlands. She's not dramatic about anything. And that was what she said. Wow. Again, she knew my ex. She knew him personally because she worked with us in the business. If you read this book, there's nothing normal about my story. My story is awful. In fact, I just posted a part 2 about how I got my half of the company back because he was threatening to take my late husband's life insurance payout, which is what I invested in the company. He's threatening to take half of it. In fact, that was fascinating because I was talking to her about could he have done that because she knows Mexican law really, really well because she's an accountant for works with the government and taxes and whatnot. And I was like, what? And she said, you got out lucky. He could have really made your life really ugly, really, really ugly. And he probably could have taken more. So it was good that I had that conversation. It was helpful. But to have this friend tell me, you didn't go through anything special. Everybody has breakups. There's nothing unique about your breakup. So be aware that roughly, 20% of the people you talk to, roughly like 1 in 5 people, are going to view you from a standpoint of competition. They're going to view the fact that they're going to even view what you're sharing as manipulation and that you're trying to exploit them in some ways. I know that's really crazy to think about because as a victim, that's the last thing on our mind. We're not thinking about, I want to exploit this person by telling them the story. You know how you feel. You can't stop talking. You're desperate. You feel like, oh my, you're reliving it in your head. You're not even probably half aware of how the people around you are experiencing it. You're certainly not trying to exploit them in some way, but there's going to be a percentage of the world who, just like you've heard self-aware narcissists saying, hey, you cry, we think you're after something. We think you've turned on the waterworks because there's some motive here. It's the same happens here. There's a percentage of the population that's going to just experience this, and I have no idea where that sound came from. That was so weird. That's going to experience this, you resharing this as, oh, Brenda just gave me, oh, thank you, Brenda. That was so sweet. I'd never heard that before. Over on Facebook, somebody just gave me a big gift. I really appreciate that. There's a certain percent of the world that's just going to hear this as exploitative. That you're just deliberately trying to garner attention, that it really wasn't that bad, that you're making a big deal over nothing. So be really, really aware to who you're talking to and the possible mindset. So that's a segment of the population. I also think there's another segment of the population that feels utterly helpless. And I know you've been there. I know that you guys have had this experience because you've listened to people who are talking about really traumatic events. And so I think that percentage of us, we just feel kind of helpless. And that helplessness feels really uncomfortable. You don't like it. I mean, have you ever listened to somebody where their problems are just over the top? They're really bad and there's nothing you can do to change it. And it makes you feel awful. And so what do we want to do when we're feeling really, really awful? Well, our tendency is we tend to want them to stop talking. Just want them to shut it down because they're making us feel uncomfortable. So I think a certain percentage of the population approaches you the way that they approach you is because they want to, I'm going to say it really crude, they want to shut you up. They just wish you'd stop making them uncomfortable. And you're making them feel powerless and they don't like it. And because they don't know what to do, they then make it a you problem. It's really a them problem, but they make it a you problem because they don't know what to do with all of this. So be aware that part of what you're getting is people's just ineptness. They don't they're not trying to be mean. They don't mean to be unkind. I think they just feel, they just don't know what to do. They don't know what to say. And which is really sad because it's actually quite simple. The solution to this is really, really simple. And I'm going to get into, if you're a listener and you have somebody who is going through something awful, I want to tell you exactly what you can do. I'm going to teach you like a psychologist, because remember, we hear it all. I mean, when you, like, I did that for 20 years. I'd see 6 clients a day, 3 days a week, or 2 to 3 days a week, and I would, for 20 years, I heard it all. You're going to hear really, really awful stuff or hard stuff, but we're trained what to do. And by the way, you don't have to be a psychologist to know how to show up for somebody. Please somehow don't attribute me special qualities like I have special listening skills or I have special level of empathy. If you guys know anything about me and been in any of my lives, you know I'm autistic. Actually, I'm a little low on empathy. I have cognitive empathy, but I'm not really high on affective empathy. So I'm not the most sensitive person in the world. So I say that to say to you, you can know how to show up. It's not that hard to show up. So I'm going to get into how to do that. All right. Then there's another section of the population that just lacks emotional intelligence. That's the bottom line. Maybe they're impaired in their empathy. Maybe they're impaired in self-reflection. Maybe they're not narcissistic. I'm not saying they're predatory, because that's 20%. But there's a certain segment of the population that just doesn't get it. Their view of the world's rather simplistic, kind of unpolarized. They tend to see things more black and white. And you sharing this to them just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And chances are they're probably a little selfish in the sense of what they're really concerned about is from their perspective. And I think here's the uncomfortable part. I'm just going to go ahead and say, I agree with you, Meryl. They're self-absorbed. But here's another piece of it. I think that segment of the population, there's a big segment of the population that doesn't like victims. They just don't like victims. I think the fear of association to victimhood makes them feel weak. I think that they have this perspective that if everybody had, and I hate this generalization. Did I say that strong enough? I hate this generalization. That if you just had good enough boundaries, this would have never happened to you. That's a lie. I'm going to tell you guys straight up. That's a lie. I've talked about boundaries before on here. Boundaries are not enough to keep you safe. They're not enough. And if you guys think that they are, good luck with that. You've just been really lucky. And that comes out of, I'm now quoting Don Hennessy out of his book, who's a law enforcement guy in Ireland. And he said that. He said the reason bad things hasn't happened to you, you just haven't met a sophisticated enough predator. You've been lucky. It has nothing to do with your great skills. We just show so much arrogance and lack of awareness when we say these types of things. So you're telling on yourself. When you attack victims, you're telling on yourself. You're oversimplifying life. You're oversimplifying relationships and people. It's not that easy. In fact, that was next week. Yes, and I'm going to be going on vacation, so my schedule's getting a little wonky here. But next week, I'm going to be talking about what to do for those of you who can't leave. I know there's a segment of you who are stuck, who can't leave. Maybe it's your age. Maybe it's health implications. Maybe you lack of finance. Maybe there's nowhere to go. Maybe your community, your culture, your religion would kick you out and you can't leave. So I've been doing a lot of research on how do you survive when you're in a situation where you can't leave. That's going to be next week. So I hope you join me next week for the live. We're going to talk about how to survive a toxic relationship if leaving is not on the table for you. So I've been doing a lot of research into all of this, and it re-emphasizes to me to the degree we love to make things simple. We tell victims to just leave. We tell victims to just get over it. We tell victims it's not that bad. Basically, it's really a reflection of our immaturity or our lack of emotional sophistication. That's really what it's reflecting. So please know that. Please know I'll tell you, after my husband, thank you so much, guys. After my husband died, so those of you who don't know my story, I've been married twice, and my first husband was a long married. We were together 31 years, and he found out at Christmas that he had a terminal form of cancer. It was a rare form I had never even heard of, a part of the body I had never even heard, and there was no treatment for it. And he passed away 5.5 months later. Horrific, horrible, I mean, I just said that. Horrific is horrible, but it was a horrible a piece of time watching this man, and strapping, strong, big, full of life guy go from that to death in 5.5 months. Just shocking. And in the midst of that, I discovered how crappy people were at getting support. Oh my goodness. I heard things like, oh, lucky you for having a marriage. They'd say really terrible things. They didn't think it was terrible. They actually thought they were really great things. Like, now you have an angel in heaven. I don't want an angel in heaven. I want my husband back. Or they would say things like, well, at least you had a great love. Okay, but I'm in my early 50s and I'm now alone for potentially the rest of my life, which may be another half. What if I live to 100? That means I spent half of my life, well, not even half. I spent a part of my life in a relationship and the rest of my life alone. Thanks for that. That's really so wonderful to wish me that. It was just, like they said really not helpful things. Or they sent me verses like, I don't know, like, show strength in God, he cares for you. Yeah, but I'm alone at night, crying at night. That doesn't help me. It just doesn't help. I just found that people just, and I knew they meant well, but here was the sad part. Here I am in my worst period of my life, one of the worst, definitely one of the worst period of my life. And I'm having to show more compassion and restrain myself from attacking people who are trying to help me. It was so weird. It was such a bizarre. I found myself just not wanting to see people. It was easier if I didn't have to deal with them, because then I didn't have to deal with all the crass things that they said. I had a social worker, somebody I worked with, took me out to dinner and said that, and then said to, this is what she said to me. This is a social worker. She was a licensed social worker. She said to me, I hate to say this to you, but I think you're going to have a hard time meeting anybody again because you're too old, too smart, and too educated. And I thought in my head, and I'm too fat, because she was super skinny. She's one of these like stick people. And I just looked at her and I'm thinking, and that's supposed to help me, telling me that you think I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life because I'm too old, too fat. Well, she didn't say fat, but too old, too smart, and too educated. Anyway, that's just a tip of what I experienced. So I want you to know this. I'm saying this to you to say you're going to meet a lot of people who are just not skilled. They're just not. That's why it's so important to get into a community of survivors. I run a support group. Mine's not the only one in the world out there. There are other options, but I certainly be aware of mine. It's called Toxic Free Relationship Club. I know some of you right now in here, like Brenda, is a member. We just really love on each other, support each other. We talk to each other. It's available, the chat's available 24/7. There's also, we do group lives at the higher level, at the club level. We have weekly lives where we come together and we talk through our issues. And then at the highest level, you can actually meet one-on-one with me once a month and then get everything else. So it's so helpful. What I've found in those groups, and by the way, I do offer financial assistance. So please don't say to me, I can't afford it, because you haven't talked to me. Because if you talked to me, you'd find out I would make it affordable for you, because it's up to me. So I have control over that. So that should not be an obstacle why you're not in the group. It is some other reason you're not in the group. It's not finances, because I can make it achievable for you. But what I have found in that group is that the amount of outpouring of compassion and understanding and just really solid, unity, and it's amazing. It's just really amazing. Yes, you can join. I can't see people, by the way. I don't have my glasses on. I try to do this without glasses so you guys don't get the reflection. So right now in TikTok, I can't see, but there is a link in my bio. If you go to my bio, it's called Toxic Free Relationship Club, takes you to the page, takes you to the level. You tell me, except for the top level of one-on-one support, I'm willing to financially negotiate so that you guys can join. There is no reason you can't be in my club. Absolutely none. I would not limit that. So please be aware that that's one option. You don't have, it's important not to go alone. It really is important not to go alone. So let me give you some advice, and then we'll take your questions. And I'm going to put my glasses on so I can officially read what you guys are writing. But I want to talk about what to do so that you are safer when you share about your story. I really want you guys to be able to get the help that you need, but do it in a way that's really conducive to help. So as much as I know this is an intense compulsion, and I understand, because I told you I was very guilty of it, very, very guilty. There's an intense compulsion, but I want you to be aware of who is it that you're talking to. Is this a person who has the capacity to actually be there? Ask yourself, have they been there around other really tough stuff before? Have they showed up for you? Have they showed up in a way that's helpful, that made you feel better at the end? Or did you feel worse? Are they people who encourage you to talk? Or do they quietly shut the conversation down and divert it into a new direction? Pay attention to the history that you have with this person and only talk to those. Oh, thank you so much for that gift. And only talk to those who have a good track record with you. It's so important for you to pay attention to that track record. I want you also to consider, and this is really a hard thing, consider asking the person's permission before you start. Ask them, say, is this a good time? I just learned something new or something come up and I have a new perspective and I'm feeling absolutely overwhelmed by it. I really would like a safe place to talk about it. Are you in the space to listen to me today? Be prepared that sometime the answer is no, and it needs to be okay. We can't ask someone permission to be able to share if we can't give them the permission to say no, they're not ready. So be prepared that sometimes you may have this burning need to say something to somebody, and you may not have that person in anyone in your world in that space who can actually listen. I have been there. There have been times I thought that what I learned or what I knew or that would like explode. It felt like it was like a pressure inside of me and I was going to explode with it. But I knew there was nobody at that moment, maybe due to the hour, maybe due to people working. I knew nobody could listen. And I knew I just had to sit on it. So consider the fact that please ask if people are emotionally available and up for it. Also, I think it's really helpful for you to, oh, that's a great question, Kate. Kate wants to know, how do you politely not engage in that conversation? We can circle back and talk about that. I think that's a great, great point that you're making. I think it's also really important if you're the one looking for support for you to tell a person what you're looking for. Be specific about what you need. Are you looking for advice? Are you wanting just a safe place to vent? Are you wanting someone to kind of hurt and cry along with you? Maybe, for example, you're really angry and you want someone to be angry with you. Want to know that this is something that one should be angry about, angry. I know for me, there was a time where you may have heard me share this story before, but my oldest son, as part of Love You More, my oldest son was diagnosed with leukemia. And he was 28 years old. It has changed the course of his life. He's healthy. We can now say he's cured. I am so thankful to God for that. But it's caused losses. There are real losses for him. One of them is that he has a damaged lungs at this point. And that there won't be any grandchildren. If he has children, he'll be adopting. So there's real losses there. And one evening, he got to talking to me about it, and he started to cry. And he held his hand out. I love that. I have sons who are very emotionally in touch. It's very touching to me that they're so aware of their emotions and aware of it. He held his hand out, and I took his hand, and I held it, and I started to cry with him. And then he said, "Thank you for crying with me. Nobody has cried with me." Sometimes we just need that. We just need someone to be angry with us or to cry with us. We need somebody to be emotionally in tune and attuned to us. So let the person know. If you want advice, say, "Hey, I'm looking for advice. I just don't really know what to do." Or maybe you're really looking for, "I just want to vent. I need to get this off my chest." Or maybe you're in a place where you really want someone that would just be there, just to listen. But it really helps for you to set the situation up by letting them know what it is that you're looking for. So those are some pieces of advice that super helps you to sort of do this. And of course, I'm going to always recommend getting counseling or coaching. You might consider, for example, EMDR or somatic therapy, things that kind of help you to reprocess in the mind and the body. That's going to be so helpful in the healing. So that would be another thing that's very, very good for this process. So that's okay. Let me circle back to the question Kate asked. What if you're the person who's listening and you know that you're not in the space to listen, but they really need to talk? You feel that pressure. Maybe even they've already started. They've already gotten 5 minutes into the story and you're feeling like, "I can't breathe. I have a lot going on in my life. I'm overwhelmed and I just can't take this on." What are you supposed to do in that moment? I would love to, what if you tried this? And it's not going to be easy. I want to tell you that. If the more empathic you are, the harder this is going to be. But I want you to say, maybe even lean out and put your hand on that person and say, listen, you really need a safe place to talk. I get that. I value that you're trusting me with this. I'm not in the space today. Can we schedule a time for me to be able to call you or to have a one-on-one with you when we talk about this? And I really want to show up in a helpful way, but I'm just today, you're not going to get the best version of me. I know that. And you deserve the best version of me. I just don't have it. Maybe I have a headache or whatever it is. I'm not urging you to lie. Please hear me that I'm not saying lie, but I do think being upfront, be empathic about the fact that you know that they have this great need to tell. I think also indicating to them that it's not that you're not willing, it's just you're not available right now. That's super helpful it's really helpful for you to do that. I also think, and I really love this advice that Suzu too is giving over on TikTok. There are things that are super helpful. I agree. Breath work, meditations, mindful exercises. There are books you can buy with mindfulness practices. They're really, really helpful. And I also, yes, you just beat me to it, Suzu. I also want to urge you. I know you hear this all the time. I'm going to actually tell you why we say it all the time. Journaling. Journaling is so impactful. Guys, that's why I spent 3 years writing Love You More. And that's why for me, if you hear me talk about it, you probably don't hear me being particularly triggered, right? I don't really sound like I'm that upset about it anymore. Do you know why? Because I spent 3 years writing it over and over. I journaled 3 years. 3 years for every day for 3 full years. And, it gave me an enormous amount of distance from it. I was able to sort of work through where some of the lies were. I sort of came to some big conclusions. I made meaning out of it. I found, I couldn't make, there's some things I will never make sense. There's some things that I will never know. And but I found closure around that I've accepted that I won't know some things. That some things will never make sense to me, that this person did really, really awful things. But it gave me a lot of peace being able to really write down the details of it. So I would urge you to journal in whatever way you want. There's no right way to do this. You don't have to someone just suggested, Suzu suggested maybe a gratitude or negativity journal, but you don't even have to do that. You could do, somebody wants to know, should they read your journals? Absolutely not. Journals are for yourself. They're not for anybody else but for yourself. You won't feel a freedom. See, if you approach the journal as you're writing it to them, then you're essentially writing a letter, a really long letter to whoever you're angry with. And there is a goal to that. Let's be super honest about this. The goal is, this is a super long letter so that you either let them have it, maybe so you get an apology, maybe you're hoping that they're somehow going to know how they hurt you and affected you, but you want something out of this by communicating it to them, by the way, which they will never give you, ever. You're not going to get it from somebody who's narcissistic, not at all. They, first of all, don't have the capacity to be empathic. They just don't. So, and on second of all, their version of the story is that you harmed them. You deserved what you got. They've rewritten this in their head to make it make sense for them. And I'm not saying that's the truth, but they've made it make sense. So it just doesn't work to do it that way. But journal for yourself. They did a fascinating study, and it was a group of people lost a job. They all lost this job, and they put them in two separate groups. One, they told them to journal about what the weather was like, mundane stuff that had nothing to do with how they felt about losing a job. The other group was the group that processed on paper how they were feeling, what was happening, what they were going through, all that kind of stuff. They found the group that journaled about their feelings found work faster. Significantly faster. They were able to get new jobs, a new position. And the conclusion was that the journaling helped them emotionally process it so that they were in a different space, which made them more appealing to the powers that be that were looking to hire someone. So it does change how you see things. I know for me, writing Love You More, it brought me a lot of healing. It gave me so much closure. There were things that at the time were wild, and I didn't know, and he was a consummate liar. I mean, there was nothing truthful that he said, very rarely. And even what he did wasn't truthful. It always had some angle. And I often, because I'm autistic, I just don't see the angle. I'm a very literal thinker. I'm not concrete necessarily, but I just don't see subterfuge. I don't see the layers I'm not like that. I've learned to get better at it, but at that time, I know that if you guys met me, you would have said, especially if you guys have been around a predator before, you would have said, Kerry, you're gullible. you're not just a little naive, you're outright gullible. And I know, in fact, you know what he said that he loved the most about me? It's like cheese. He said, "You're without malice." He was calling me out. He's telling me that I was naive. So yeah, I there was a lot that I just took at face value that really wasn't face value. It was manipulation. It was deception. I just didn't anticipate somebody would go that way, that somebody would be that devious, honestly. So for me, it was super helpful to write it down because it enabled me to see through and make sense of the stuff that just was insensible. It was illogical. It was just outright evil. Honestly, a lot of the stuff he did is evil. So it really, really helped me to do that. Yeah, so TFF said she joined I think it's a personality and a narcissistic personality Facebook group and Reddit groups that really have helped. That is awesome. I do agree. I agree with you. She says be careful because there's meanies everywhere online. Absolutely, you're going to find trolls everywhere. So even in these group settings, thank you so much, Suzu. You're going to find trolls that are dangerous. So be really, really careful about get to know get to know the group. Oh, you are a she. Okay. Get to know the group. Go in and lurk for a little while. Find out what the feel of the group is and how other people are treated who are vulnerable. In other words, I want you to go in and be savvy. We really need to be really super savvy about how we approach our support. And I think that's the bottom line that I kind of want to wrap this up with today, is to really urge you to consider how you're approaching what you need. And don't let, as much as it's a temptation, and I understand the temptation, you feel this intense pull to share, and you feel like because you've gone through something horrible, you should be able to share. I don't disagree with you. You should be able to share. But keep one foot in the logical world, knowing that not everybody has earned the right to hear your story. Not everyone has earned the right of your vulnerability and your trust. You're taking a big leap of trust when you share this stuff with people. And as much as I hate saying this, be conscious of how much energy you're asking this person to expend. Ask yourself, could I expend that kind of energy back? And that's what's so great about hiring professionals or getting to more professional communities, is because those people have been trained and they're doing it purposefully. They know what they're getting into and they're doing their own work to make sure they don't burn out. Whereas when you're with somebody who's not trained, there's a risk that they may experience compassion fatigue and then take that out on you. Okay, before I wrap it up, there was one last group I want to talk about, and then I'm going to take your questions about anything you guys want to talk about today. But the last thing I want to talk about is there are some people who never move on. Never move on. You will hear some people incessantly talk about something. In fact, it happened to me on Instagram. There was this person sharing, it was actually a guy sharing his life experience, horrible experience of being cheated on. And he shared for months about this, like on and on for months. And I didn't really know a lot about, I knew some of the details. He was telling me the details, but I finally said, hey, when did this happen to you? When did this all go down? He said 9 years ago. 9 years? He's been doing this for 9 years. He's still this angry, this worked up. He's still, venting like this 9 years later. I want to tell you, I hate to say this because I may be stepping on some of your toes, but if it's been, like for me, it's been 5 years. You don't hear me doing this. I do it once in a while. Like if you meet me in a personal setting and you bring up something, you might trigger me and I might tell you a story, but I don't feel this intense urge everywhere all the time to talk about it. I really don't. And sometimes I don't talk about it at all. And people have no idea that I went through this. But if you still feel that intense urge to tell almost strangers information that they haven't had the right to earn, and there's no difference, like 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 15 years later, I really think then you haven't done harder work of getting into therapy and really processing this with safe people. You haven't done EMDR, you haven't seen a counselor, you haven't been into therapy, you have been sitting on this with this raw, unprocessed memory stored in your amygdala, not in your hippocampus, which is causing this. And to me, that is actually the technical term of trauma dumping. And there are some people, let's be frank, who just that the trauma happened to them, and it didn't necessarily damage them, but it's added to the damage, and they were already wounded people, fragile people, and now they're really fragile. So you're going to find a segment of the population that this is actually a group of people who are really hurt, and trauma dumping is one of the ways in which they express the fact that they've been terribly hurt. Now, I'm sorry if I've hurt any of you guys' feelings. You know how much I love and care for you all. You guys mean so much to me. I do this every week for an hour because I love being here with you all. So I'm not trying to attack anyone here. I really am not. But I am saying, I'm really urging you to please, please don't sit unhealed. Please don't. Please find the help. In fact, if you find that that's going on for you, then one of the things I want you to be aware of is that I am having a Healing Strong group coaching that's starting August 22nd, and a second group starting September 5th, that Lisa, Sunny, and I for 12 weeks live will work through you, work with you for 12 weeks with a small group of 8 people and help you process this in a safe place with safe questions, with trust to build in a built-in community to where you can really look at the hard things that you can't get over. Exactly, Sandy, like your anger. Sandy says, I'm still angry. I get it. Maybe you're feeling guilty. Maybe you feel like you made the wrong mistake. Maybe you know that you should be over this guy or over this woman and you're not, and you still wonder why you're holding on. Then getting into the Healing Strong group coaching, which starts in August and September, is the perfect way to be able to work through it. I've led 2 groups through. They both groups, actually 3 groups now through it, and all the groups have had rave reviews to say how helpful it's been. So there is ways of healing. There is access out there that would really, really help you. Yeah, I agree. So TFF said he or she's been watching The Bear. Yeah, the mom and the bear. Whoo! I don't know if you guys saw FX show. It's about ready to. What time is it, Lee? I'll tell you in a minute. FX is about ready to release season 3, but season 2, I think it's episode 4 or 6. It's about the Christmas one, and it's called, I think it's the 7 Fishes. Whoa, man. Yeah, that's a good example of unprocessed trauma for sure. A lot of that family has unprocessed trauma, actually. The time of Healing Strong is Thursday afternoons from 3 o'clock my time, 3 o'clock Central, and it goes for 75 minutes. So it's 12 weeks, starts in August, it wraps up a couple weeks before Christmas. And then there's a second group that's going to start September 5th, and it wraps up just before Christmas. And it goes for 75 minutes on Thursdays afternoons. I would love to see you guys there. It's going to be amazing, so helpful. And if you're not for sure, schedule a discovery call with me. You know, I'm offering 15 minutes with me to talk about, is this group right? Maybe what are you really looking for? What do you kind of need? You know, that's another possibility as well. Okay, questions. What are your questions for me? Yeah, Meryl, we have been silenced for so long. It's really sad how the society doesn't support victims well. It really doesn't. I mean, I'm using victims deliberately because of that. Kate wants to know, is The Bear emotionally heavy? I want to kind of watch it, but I'm not for sure if it's going to bother me. What it's going to do for you is that if you've been around one of the braggart kind of narcissists who can't shut their mouths, who just runs and controls everything, one of the characters is like that. But in the beginning, I felt flooded. I have to admit, I felt really flooded by it. But as I watched it and it progressed through the second season, there's a big arc on him. And that's a fascinating arc. And he actually starts to change and he becomes less intense and less, yeah. Somebody else just said, oh, it's heavy, hun. It's heavy. I like it. I like it a lot. But I have to, what's really helpful is it's only 22, 25 minutes long. And sometimes you're like, whoa, okay, that literally, whoa, I have a headache. That's enough. And to watch one episode, I couldn't binge watch it. So, yeah, Kate, MJ is not sure, but the price is a problem. You can email Kerry. Absolutely. Always email me for sure. And I can talk to you guys about that, whatever the price is that you're wanting to know about. Okay, other questions for me? All right, you guys got really quiet. I know this has not a topic a lot of people would be want to hear, so I knew that this wasn't going to be a really huge, lots of people in this audience. You know, talk about the mind of a narcissist. I'll pull in a lot of people. Talk about trauma dumping. People aren't so interested. Can you see mine? Maybe, Kat. Let me go back and see if I can find it. Is exclusive for survivors of narcissistic abuse for others too. You talking about healing strong? Well, I mean, are you sure that you haven't been in a narcissistically abusive relationship? Because I think a lot of us have been and we don't realize it. But yeah, I would say it works for other things. I would say it works for any problematic relationship that you're trying to heal from and includes all types of relationships. That's another thing. People assume this is just about, I know I missed the Q&A box too. People assume that healing strong is just for romantic relationships. Absolutely not. And it's not for just women. It's for men and women. And I've had people in there who have are struggling with a friendship, or I've had people who have been struggling with family members. So it's not exclusive to just a romantic relationship, and it's not exclusive to a certain kind of relationship. Um, do I use internal family systems? I'm aware of internal family systems. I wasn't trained in it, Meryl. I was trained psychodynamically, and then I also have learned brief brief solution focused therapy. I know that a little bit about that. I know a little bit about CBT, how that works, and I've also had quite a bit of training in family systems theory and a lot in object relations theory. So that's the wild thing about psychology. Maybe you guys don't know this, so I'm going to share a weird thing that I didn't know until I got into psychology. Did you know that there's not one way to heal people? There's lots of ways. And each way is a different theory. It's kind of like based on a different theoretical understanding of how the mind and how relationships work. And so you can have, so we are in a way are like different people looking at we're looking at an elephant from different angles. So some of us may be standing at the tail, others of us may be standing at the trunk, some of us may be standing at the side, and so we'll approach our relationship issues from a different perspective. Yeah. So it's helpful to know your therapist or coach's perspective, particularly therapists, because if you ask, they can tell you. Mine is more, I see things from a developmental standpoint, meaning I tend to see that we are a growing human and we have stages in which we view ourselves in the world, and that impacts the way it shapes the way we interpersonally relate to other people. But I also see how we connect and see each other as humans. Are we able to respect each other as humans? And how impaired, nobody sees each other perfectly, but how impaired is that? That's another way I like to see things. You've been doing top-down therapy. That's great. And EMDR talk therapy. Yeah, there's certain types of therapy has been found not very helpful in working with narcissistic abuse. Yeah, I agree with you. I know I'm jumping topics here. I agree, Meryl. Psychiatry tends to lean heavily into the medical model. That's what I would call it. Very much into a medical model, so that everything's addressed chemically, through the body, systemically. Top down versus bottom up. That's the way to think about therapy. I'm trying to remember, Sandy, and how do you, which one is talk is the top? Is talk the bottom up or top down? I always get that mixed up. Yeah, mindfulness and DBT, that's another really good ones too. DBT is called dialectic behavioral therapy, and then mindfulness is something similar to that. Talking is top down. Yes, talking. Yeah. So what they're saying though is they believe that doing something from the bottom up is better, which would be sematic therapies. And EMDR would be an example of that. Another one would probably be brain spotting might be an example of that. I know there's now forms of yoga that are therapeutic forms of yoga that are really helpful as well. We're trying to build more somatic types of therapy. That's been a weak area, an under-researched area in psychology. We've really leaned heavily into talk, as a way to access the mind, but it really isn't a great way because you have your conscious mind. It stands in the center and impacts what you think and feel, and whereas the body has different kinds of memories and sort of sees things differently. So it's really helpful to do something that helps you, is more related, connected to your body, because you are traumatized at all levels, spiritually, physically, psychologically. And you may say, but this person never touched you. Yeah, but emotional pain causes physical pain. It's experiences physical pain. Your body still sees it as threat. You've been at threat. I agree. I think exercise is a pivotal piece of recovery. I know for me, yoga has been a really big piece of recovery. I'm also an SA survivor, so for me, it's been hard to feel comfortable in my body and feel safe in my body. So for me, doing yoga at home alone has given me a lot of freedom to feel more in my body instead of dissociating and being out of my body. It's been really pivotal for that. That's an interesting, yeah, we different see different parts of the elephant, but we need to learn to talk to each other about the different points of view. I agree. I do think psychology is not bad at that. We're not bad at talking to each other about the different types of ways in which we view the world. For those of you who don't know what internalized family systems is, it views that every part of yourself, so you have a part of yourself that maybe it's not very supportive, maybe it's very reactive, maybe it's really anxious, maybe you have another part of yourself that's really super caring and supportive and shows up, or maybe it's like childlike, maybe you're impulsive. It views that each of these have been developed as a sort of protective exiles and managers, right? As protective pieces of yourself. They're protectors, they're reactors and protectors, and they have an intent. They have an intent. Their intent is to keep track of you and keep you safe. Now the problem is it doesn't work. And sorry, TikTok always makes me reload at an hour. It doesn't always work, so you end up needing you have to sort of understand its purpose, why that part of yourself is stepping in and taking over that way. Oh, thank you so much. Someone's just calling out my podcast that they love it. So, for those of you who don't know, I have Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse, and we do a weekly show. It's every Monday. It's dropped, and we also have a video. The video gets dropped on YouTube, and yeah, this week was on trauma dumping. Next week will be what to do if you can't leave, and then the week after that is with Dirty Laundry. Dirty Laundry. Alex Howard and Amanda Smith joined me, and they are mediators from Toronto, and they joined me to talk about how to handle mediation, the legal piece, when conflict is inevitable and moves into the courts. So how to deal with that? What some things to be mindful of that. So that's the next few weeks worth of podcasts coming up. Well, you guys, this has been really, really wonderful. We're coming up on an hour. Any last questions for me? Yeah, I agree. Managers douse the flames of big emotions. I find myself sharing what's happening because I was never able to voice myself in the moment, and I was given the silent treatment. I do think, Cam, that is a big reason, like a lot of us, we've lost our voice, lost our power, and so it becomes a way for us to regain our power. But again, remember not to let your need or your impulse overwhelm your wisdom and the protective part of yourself. So as much as you may need that and have a strong desire to take your voice back, always remember it should be with those who have earned and deserve your trust. How do we control ourselves from getting emotionally triggered around family members who have tons of anxiety and emotional outbursts? I feel very anxious around those people. I would recommend that you go in with start practicing breathing. Maybe you're already super good at that. You're a very good deep breather when you feel the urge. How you can listen to my podcast, Kat, is just go into wherever you listen to podcasts and put Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse. You can also go to my website called breakingfreenarcissisticabuse.com. Again, that's breakingfreenarcissisticabuse.com. But it's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on Amazon. So anywhere you listen, iHeart, it's on iHeart as well. You can find it. But yeah, go back in and like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut off that answer. I would get ready with deep breathing. I would also plan an exit strategy. I might even enlist those that I really trust and know to be part of my allies. Maybe for them to, when they see this person moving towards you or things heating up in a certain direction, maybe they can step in and either distract or, intervene. Maybe they can, take you to a new room. I think I would also plan out where I was going to go in that room, wherever that space is. Like if it gets too intense, I'm going to go take a walk outside. Maybe I'm going to go into another room. If it's at a dinner table, and it starts to get heated, maybe you can use that moment for a bathroom break. But plan ahead. I would plan strategies ahead. In other words, you don't have to be at the mercy of family or at the mercy of people who are harmful just because you're trying to be polite. We need to stop being polite. There's no reason to be polite. You can be kind, but we don't need to be polite. I try not to make eye contact. Yeah, I do that too. And that, I'm laughing, but that actually gives you a lot of emotional distance not to meet somebody's eyes, for sure. Yeah, so Tammy's telling a story. I'm torn if my family's even, it looks like you got a family member assaulted you and that's really awful. How do we know who's safe and has earned our trust? Um, by time, by small risks. I heard of a really great trick. It's not really a trick, it's a strategy. I would say it's more of a strategy to make up something that's not actually a real thing. Like pretend maybe you're afraid of something silly. Or maybe there's a nickname you actually never had, but you claim that it's a nickname. But tell somebody a secret like that, and let them know that let them think that it's an emotionally loaded secret. In other words, that you're trusting them with something vulnerable. And then I want you to watch what happens with that person. What do they do with that? Does that come back? Do you ever hear it used against you or told to some? Does it come back that they've gossiped about you and it comes back to you? But pay attention to what they do with stuff like that. That tells you a whole lot about that person. But people should have earned your trust. We don't need just to give them our trust. Keynote, how you find Toxic Free Relationship Club is actually, it's a link in this show notes on YouTube. I always have it as a link. So no, it's not the one on Facebook. I do have a free one on Facebook, but it's not very active. I hate to say I don't put a lot of effort and time into it because I put way more time into my paying community. But yeah, it's so go to the show notes and if you can't find the show notes, then go to my website, kerrymcavoyphd.com, and one of the options is club membership or membership, and there's where you're going to find information on it. All right, you guys, it's been an hour. I need to wrap it up. I'm going to go over to my Toxic Free Relationship Club now, and we're going to be meeting here as a group in a few minutes, so I want to wrap this up. But thank you so much for this, and next week we're going to come back and talk about what if you can't leave? How do you survive a toxic relationship when leaving is not an option? And I'm so glad you guys hung out with me today. I see you guys have been here the whole time, like on my way. You were the first to say anything to me today. So I really, really, really appreciate that so much. And thank you so much, TikTok and Brenda and Maria. You guys, I deeply appreciate you being here and getting to know you. And Kino, now you're new to me, and I now know you as well. I tend to recognize people who come back as a regular. By the way, if you guys didn't know, this is a regular thing. I do this every Tuesday at 4 p.m. And next week I'll be back here at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. So, all right, you guys, take care. Have a good weekend. Stay safe, and and we'll see you back next week.